Now let's look at how we can modify those animations once we apply them on characters. So let's look at our first example. This is my folder that I will be using. And from the models folder, I'm going to be using the Brazilian soccer player character. I'm gonna say no animation. Okay. And for motion file, I'm going to be using the boxing.bvh file. Okay. So let me characterize both of the characters and the animation file. So I'm going to be using characters by pad. I will also characterize the BVH file. Now this was my soccer player, and this was the BVH file for boxing. Okay, so I'm going to select the soccer player as my character, and for the source of the animation I will be using BVH boxing. Okay, so let me play the animation. What's happening here is that when this motion was recorded, apparently the system didn't have the finger capture feature. So the finger poses were not captured. Just the body parts were captured. So what we need to do as animators then is to change the finger poses into a fist pose so that he will look like he's actually boxing. So to make any kind of changes to your animations, the first thing we need to do is to bake the animation to control rig. Now what is that? Well, as you see here, now our character's animation is driven by this BVH file. So in a sense, our soccer player character is actually being a puppet and controlled by someone else, and then someone else is the BVH file. So our character itself doesn't have any motions. He's just being driven by an external file. So what we need to do is to bake those animations into his own control rig. Okay? Without that, we cannot make any kind of changes or to our animations. So I'm gonna bake that, and the way to do that is to go to this blue button here and click on it, and then we go to this option here that says bake plot, and we will bake the animation to the control rig. And look what happens to this silhouette here where it shows the control rig. So I'm gonna click on it here. It's asking me should I have FKIK or IK only. We'll say FKIK. Okay, so once you do that, as you see, the silhouette of the control rig has changed and added those lines, which means now the whole animation is driven by its own control rig. So he doesn't need anyone else for the animation. To prove that to you, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to the schematic view by pressing Ctrl W, and let me go zoom out here. And this was our BVH file, right? So I'm going to select all of that, right click, delete, confirm, delete character, yes to all. So if I go back by pressing Ctrl W to my scene, I don't have my character anymore. And as you see, the source of the animation now is changed to control rig. Okay, so we're not using the BVH file anymore. But if you press play, you'll see that he is still doing the boxing. Again, why? Because his animation is now baked into his control rig, and he doesn't need any other BVH file, any other external BVH file for the animation. So now that we baked the animation to the control rig, we are ready to modify this this animation. Okay, so this one is kind of an easy one because all we need to do is to go back to the first frame where he is in the T pose and just change both of the hands to a fist pose, and that's it. Okay, but to do that we will need to use this part here, which is called animation layers. We have base animation right now by default and anim layer 1. Now base animation is the layer that has all the animations for every single bone. The anim layer 1 is an empty layer which doesn't have any kind of information in it at all. Okay, so if you select any kind of bones here, okay, and go to here, you should be able to see the keyframes here. But here this one says too many keys for edit. So we actually have keyframes, but it's just too many to edit for MotionBuilder. Okay, but we know that we have keyframes on this bone. Okay, if you go to the empty layer, you don't see anything here, or that's how we understand that this layer is empty. Okay, so think of the animation layers as the layers in Adobe Photoshop. So what I will do now is I will come to the empty one here, and I'm gonna rename this layer in order to be or to stay organized. I'm gonna go to rename. I'm gonna call this left hand. Again, when you name your layers, do not use any spaces or any special characters. Okay, so what I say here is that I'm going to modify the left hand. Okay, so I'm gonna come to the fingers here, and if you remember from our previous courses, to get into the fist pose, you can use the selection mode, rotation tool, and instead of global, we select additive. And now I'll select these 4 fingers, and I'm gonna zoom in a bit. Okay, and I'm gonna bring hands down there. And for the thumb, before I pose the thumb, I'm gonna get out of the selection mode and I'm gonna go back to the full body mode. Okay, I'm gonna select the thumb here. I'm gonna come closer and I'm gonna bring it like that. Again, you can spend as many time as you want to perfect the fist pose, but since our main goal here is not posing but just modifying the animations, I'm not gonna spend too much time on this one. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select all these fingers. Okay, and I will create a keyframe. Again, I am at the first frame, so I'm gonna click on key, and basically for the left hand I don't need to do anything else. I come here, let me zoom out, press F for full, or let me get out here. There we go. Okay, so if I press play, you realize that the left hand now is in the T pose for the whole duration of the animation, which is what we want. So we just need to do the exact same thing for the right hand. I'm gonna stop it here, go back to the beginning, use the other hand, select the 4 fingers, go to the selection mode, rotation tool, and the additive mode. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom in, press F. Okay, and again for the thumb, I'm gonna use the full body mode, select it, use the translate tool, Okay. Let's get out. And now, do not forget to add the keyframes. Okay. Oh, what I forgot here is that since I am modifying the other hand, I'm gonna actually use or create another layer for that one. So I'm gonna have separate layers for separate bones that I modify, which will give me more control over each bone later on. So I'm gonna rename this to right hand. Okay, so my bones are selected and I press key, right? So now when I play, I get both hands in the fist pose for the whole duration of the animation. So this was the very basic modification to your original animation. Now, what we need to understand here as well is this little section here where it says weight, and we have this keyframe icon here as well. So what is weight? Think of weight as the opacity switch in Photoshop for each layer. So when you bring the opacity of each layer to, for example, like to 50%, you see some of the things that are on that layer, but it's also semi-transparent, right? So it's the same way here. So if I come here, let me zoom into one of the hands. Okay, so let's look at this one here to the right. So right now, the layer right hand is set to 100% for the weight. So we see the full change that we did on that hand. If I bring this down to a lower number, look what happens. You see? So right now, the change that we did for that layer is at 0%. So we're showing 0% of it. Okay? If we increase it to 100%, we see the full 100% of the effect or the change that we made. So you can also animate this. You can get from this pose to this one with a nice animation, right? And the same thing for the left hand. I click on the left hand and do the same thing, which is pretty cool. Okay, now let's move on to the second example. I'm going to use the same character, which is a Brazilian soccer player. And I'm going to characterize it real quick. Characterize biped. Rename soccer player. And for the motion file this time, I'm going to use the footballkick.bvh file. So I'm going to drag and drop it onto the scene. BVH import. It's somewhere here. Okay. Let's characterize this as well. I would say ball kick. Okay. So I'm going to change the source of the animation to ball kick. Alright, so this is the animation. When you get a new animation onto a character, as an animator, what you need to do is to watch the whole thing and try to see if there is any problems that you can detect. Okay, so when we play this, let's play again. Okay, I think I noticed one problem here, which is like right here. We see that his left arm goes into his body, which is of course not natural, so we need to fix that. Okay, so we need to modify this animation. Now of course, just like I said before, anytime you want to make any kind of changes to an animation, what you need to do is to bake that animation on to the control rig. Having my soccer player selected, I'm going to this blue button here and bake to control rig. and FKIK. Right now, I don't need this this BVH file since my animation is now baked into the control rig. So since it's not necessary in the scene, I'm just going to delete it to keep my scene clean. So right click, delete, confirm. Go back to the scene. Okay, what can we do now? I'm going to be modifying the left arm, so I'm gonna rename this empty layer to left arm. Okay. Now, the difference between this example and the previous one is that in the boxing example, we changed the finger posing in the first frame and then kept that same pose for the entire animation. But in this case, we don't need to make any changes for the whole duration. We need to make a change only when the hand goes to the body. Okay? So what we need to do is actually to keep the original animation up until just before his hand or his arm goes into his body. So maybe right here. Okay? So I'm going to first select this bone here. This is the one that I'm going to be modifying. So now that that is selected, I'm going to give a 0 keyframe here. So I'm going to click on 0 at this moment in time. Now, what is 0? What does it mean? It means that actually I don't want to change anything from the original animation. So there is 0 change from the original animation. Okay, because I want to keep the animation up until here. And from here, when the hand goes in, right there, okay, this is when I want to make some changes. So I'm gonna use the rotate tool, and at this moment in time, I'm going to open the hand up. There we go. Now I'm going to be using the regular keyframe button, right? Before I use the 0 key, now I'm going to use the regular key button. Okay, so look what happens to the animation. Everything is, and let me deselect the bone. Everything is okay. Actually, let me select the bone so you can see the keyframes as well. So up until here, I didn't make any change to the animation. But now, as you see, the hand is not going to the body because we made a keyframe here and then we reposed the arm. Okay? So we fixed that problem quite easily. When you watch the rest of the animation, look what happens. The hand is now in an unnatural pose again. And the reason for that is that once we made that change in the arm, we kept that pose intact. So we need to actually go back to the original animation. After I fix the problem, I want to go back to the original animation. Okay? So maybe here I need to go back to the original animation, as I said. So for that, I'm gonna use again the 0 key. I click here. There we go. So now let's see what happens. There we go. The arm is back to its original positions. Now in this second example, what we learn is to make a modification to any part of the body for a certain period of time, not for the entire duration, but for a certain period of time. Now let's look at our third example. For this example, I'm gonna use a different character, and this time I'm gonna go back to the tutorials folder, which comes with MotionBuilder, and I'm gonna be using this Aragorn character, no animation. Okay, so if you look at this right here, you realize that it's already characterized. And you can also see it here as well. So there's no need for us to characterize him again. but I'm gonna use a motion file that says sitting down. So I'm going to be using this one. So I need to characterize this one. Characterize biped, and let's rename it to sitting down. Okay, so the source is gonna be sitting down. Now F, press play, he comes and sits down. Okay, so since he's sitting down, we need a chair in the scene. So I'm gonna go to the models, and here's the chair model. I'm gonna bring it in. FBX, this time instead of FBX open, I'm gonna use FBX merge to add it to the scene. No animation. Okay, so here's my chair. Now this chair is made up of several elements, as I told you guys before. So I'm gonna go to the schematic view and try to find that, and it's right here. Okay, I'm gonna select these, go back to the regular view and use the translate tool, bring it here, maybe down, maybe a bit to the right as well. Okay, and a bit to the back. Okay, again I'm going to bake the animation to the control rig, and I'm gonna get rid of the BVH file since I don't need it anymore. Okay, so again, as an animator, the first thing you need to do is to identify the problems that we need to fix. So the most obvious one here is that actually he sits through the chair. So I'm gonna fix that by using the hip bone here. All right, so I'm gonna go to the empty layer, rename, and I'm gonna call it hip bone. Okay, so he's gonna come there, sit, and right before he starts sitting, maybe right here, or maybe right there, I'm gonna click on 0 button here, because I want to keep the animation, the original animation, up until here. And right when he sits here, I want to bring the hip bone up. Okay, so right there. Okay, and now I'm going to give a keyframe here. So see what happens now. Perfect. So now he sits perfectly on the chair. Now when we do this, now we actually create another problem, which is the hands. What you need to do then is to create a new layer, and again use separate layers for the left hand and the right hand to have more control later on. But basically the workflow is as we have seen so far. You bring in the animation file, you apply it to the character, you bake the animation to the control rig, and then you use animation layers to adjust any kind of poses that have some problems. Okay, and as I mentioned in the class, your project is to look at this file and complete all the other problems that this animation file has. So actually you have two things to do. First, identify the problems. Second, fix those problems. So this is basically how you can modify any kind of animation inside of MotionBuilder. In the next session, we will learn how to use the story editor in order to combine multiple motion files into one continuous motion.